Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this video, I'm going to be talking about the total lunar eclipse at the 8th of November and, of course, all the other things that are happening around that time, astrologically speaking, which, of course, are all going to play a part in how this eclipse manifests. So let's start at the beginning and look at eclipses and particularly the idea of the season of eclipses. Basically, every year there are about 4 eclipses and they come in pairs. There's a solar eclipse and a lunar eclipse. So there's a new moon eclipse and a full moon eclipse. We've already had 3 eclipses this year, one in April, one in the middle of May, and now we're getting our 4th and final one in November. And that's a pair, a bookend, if you like, a new moon and a full moon with the solar eclipse of the 25th of October. Now, in general, when we look at eclipses and we think about the nature of a solar eclipse, which is about new beginnings with knobs on, so that around the time of a solar eclipse, things come into the foreground, which we didn't know about. They're things that are new and they open new chapters, whether that's for us individually or whether we're looking at this in the sense of nations and global affairs. But in a way, whenever you've got an eclipse, whether it's a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse, something is always in shadow. So there's either something that we don't know about at the time of an eclipse that has yet to be revealed, or we're looking at the fact that something has been in shadow and now we're able to see it in the full light, if you like, of the eclipse. So this lunar eclipse on the 8th of November is a bookend, if you like, with the solar eclipse of the 25th of October, but it has an even bigger beginning, and that is the solar eclipse of the 30th of April. So that was the new moon in Taurus, because this is the full moon in Taurus. So if you think back to that time and think what happened in the late April period, or even earlier than that, in the beginning of April and into May, and think about new beginnings you may have made at that point, or the things that happened out of, the blue, they've got something to say about this lunar eclipse coming. Either the whole thing is finished, it's done and dusted, it's got a beginning and a middle and an end, or we're seeing the end of an important stage of it. And I think we're going to see that particularly in the case of Taurus and Scorpio, because this lunar eclipse falls in the sun in the sign of Scorpio and the moon in the sign of Taurus. Now, there are other things that I want to put out here just in general. If we think about what this eclipse might mean, we've got some keywords. We come up with 3 good keywords: crisis, catharsis, and major shifts. And if we think about that, that gives us a loose idea of what to expect around this time in our own lives, especially if that eclipse connects with something in our natal chart, but also to bear in mind for things out on the world stage. Catharsis, very good word. We talk about this in the sense of emotions building up, emotions that have been blocked, suddenly getting released. And we can look at this to describe or to think about the events related to the lunar eclipse is just that. Things that have been blocked are now released. And again, we have some rough idea of the climate of the times around this eclipse. We can also look at the fact that the eclipse is in the sign of Taurus. And what do we associate Taurus with? Well, finance. With buildings, property, agriculture, the earth, nature, all these kind of things. So we could say that we're going to see something that's been building up and is ready for release, particularly in those areas that I've just mentioned. But again, of course, wherever Taurus is in your chart, we're going to be looking at that house area that's got something to say about the nature of this eclipse and the events that are happening. Now, before I go much further, I think what I want to do is have a look at what that eclipse looks like in terms of the astrology. So we put it in a horoscope wheel and we can see it more clearly. So here we are with our chart of the eclipse. And if you can see here in the lower half of the circle, we can see the sun there, the circle with the dot in the middle at 16 of Scorpio. Where we look directly at the opposite point in the chart, we see the moon, which is pretty obvious, in the sign of Taurus. So it is a full moon, which we can see in the chart. And because it's on the nodal axis or in that region, that's why we've got a lunar eclipse. Now, in fact, there's another very, very important factor in this chart, well, two really, which I think you could probably spot immediately. If we look at the degree of the moon there at 16 of Taurus, we can see right up close and personal is planet Uranus, also at 16 of Taurus. And if we then move to the very base of the chart, we can see Saturn in Aquarius at 18 degrees of Aquarius, only a little distance away. So this eclipse isn't just about the sun and the moon, but it's about Uranus and Saturn as well. And of course, ever since 2021, we've been looking at these two very different planets in relationship with each other. And the easiest, most simple way to interpret or to see how these planets work when they're together, as it were, is in what we've been through with COVID, in the endless lockdowns and then the release from lockdowns, and the back and to we've seen with the contraction in things and then the sudden release. That's the pattern. So we know that this is going to be a lunar eclipse that's going to bring those two principles very much into play. We're going to get a release from a long, protracted period where the status quo has been whatever it's been. But I would say that even looking at Uranus with its properties of awakening, which we like, the idea that Uranus brings breakthroughs, which we like, but we can't dismiss the idea that Uranus is very volatile, explosive, and does all sorts of things we don't like. And in the grip of Saturn, it means the effects of actions taken around the time of this eclipse are going to be long-lasting. And they're also going to be difficult to really swallow. Let's put it like that. So as we can see here, if we look again to the 9 o'clock point in our horoscope, we see the sun there at 16. We see Mercury very close to the sun. That's also 15, 16, very close. And Venus not too far away either. So we've got these three personal planets, so to speak, in opposition to the moon and Uranus and squaring Saturn. That's why this is a really, really important period. And if we look at the surrounding days of that eclipse, and you know, the timeline of an eclipse is always elastic. It doesn't just happen on the day. I mean, often there are spectacular events on the day of an eclipse, and we can point the finger directly at it. But more often than not, the events are before that time or after that time. And it's only when the event happens and we look at the astrology of that moment do we see the imprint of the eclipse in there with its degree areas. So we are certainly going to see that taking place around this season of eclipses. So if we start around the 27th of October, that's just in the wake of the solar eclipse, Mercury will be squaring Pluto. Now, before that time, in the week of the 17th of October, we had the Sun and Venus squaring Pluto, which is why that week of October would have been particularly volatile and challenging. And I just want to say that I'm actually recording this video on the 15th of October. So I'm even in advance, really, of the Sun and Venus square to Pluto. So I do not yet know for real what events we can relate immediately to that, whether we're talking about your personal life, my personal life, the lives of my clients and friends, or we're talking about different nations with different things going on, and this eclipse and all the aspects to Pluto causing turmoil. Now, what I do know already is the UK financial markets are in turmoil. And we've already seen our Chancellor go, and I suspect Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, has a very short term in office before she goes too. And it's been very difficult to quieten these UK financial markets. And unfortunately, I think this is going to spread. And so we're going to see some global volatility in the markets. And remember, I said at the beginning, the idea of Taurus is about finance. And so when we get this full moon eclipsed in Taurus, then I think you can expect the global economy to be very, very wobbly at this particular time. Now, as we go through this period before the lunar eclipse, we've also got Jupiter returning to Pisces, which of course we can see in our horoscope here. There it is at 29 Pisces. And we're also going to see Mars stationary retrograde, and it turns retrograde on the 30th of October. Now, obviously, it's going to be stationary for a longer period than that, but the actual moment where it does start to move in a retrograde direction is the 30th. Now, this is going to be a troublesome spot. This is why the whole week of 2 weeks before that and the whole week or 2 weeks after, looking only at Mars's change of direction. That's going to be very combative. We're going to have a lot of combats, whether we're talking about dialogues and strikes and political discussions and arguments, or whether we're talking about armed conflicts. This retrograde stationary Mars is going to play a big part in armed conflicts. So, of course, we know we've already got a big armed conflict, that in Ukraine, and we already saw that ratcheted up, as I had already suggested, from the full moon in Aries on the 9th of October right through to the 15th of November. This period, we're going to see some big developments in the Ukraine war. We've already seen some of that, and I suspect during the time we're waiting for this video to go up and the time it goes up, there are going to be much more dramatic events linked to this. And of course, as you know, the solar eclipse on the 25th of October related to a previous one in 2014, which of course was all about Putin taking Crimea in the first place. So we know that Ukraine's future is going to turn in this time period in 2022. I also want to, well, let's go forward a little bit more. And we're now in November, and we look at Venus opposing Uranus on the 5th of November, Venus squaring Saturn on the 7th of November. And then the very day after, we get that total eclipse. And thereafter, the 9th and the 10th and 11th, we've got the Sun and Mercury opposing Uranus and squaring Saturn. That's why this lunar eclipse is almost like none other that we've had for a very, very long time. It is going to shake things up. Now, let's hope it's going to shake things up for the better, because a lot of things perhaps need abandoning and a new order beginning. That's probably essential. Certain nations need that to happen, but nobody can pretend with this kind of astroscape that it's going to be easy. It's going to bring a lot of damage, whether we're talking about political damage, whether we're talking about economic damage, or whether we're talking about damage to people and buildings and the earth itself. So this is, I can't really mince my words here. So it's a really, challenging kind of few weeks. I'm going to come back to me for a minute. I may come back to the chart shortly, but I want to return here because this is really quite interesting when viewed in America. Because if you remember the chart that we've just been looking at, I set for Washington, D.C., because I suspect events around the time of this lunar eclipse are going to be particularly relevant to Washington and the government. The midterm elections are actually on the 8th of November, and you saw all that cluster of really, really volatile influences. And to have that surrounding the midterm elections, we just know from the get-go that this is going to be a very, very volatile time. And I think what we could be looking at, and there's been a big division in America, and I know I've got a big American audience, so you don't need me to tell you what's been going on in America, but there is a big division between those who feel that the election was stolen from Donald Trump and the rest who believe, no, it wasn't. So that's your first division. And we know from the January 6th Capitol riot that there are groups and there's a strong kind of resistance to the idea of government getting in the way of the right thing. It depends on your perspective, what you think the right thing is, but that's broadly what we're looking at. I think we've got a repeat of this coming up around the time of the lunar eclipse. And another reason that I think this is important is if, let's go back quickly to the chart again. And I want to point to Jupiter at 29 degrees of Pisces, that's in that sort of 5 o'clock position, and Neptune at 22 degrees of Pisces, a very sort of broad Jupiter-Neptune conjunction. Now, what I want to say here is this does have a resonance with the American Civil War. Now, the American Civil War began on April the 12th, 1861. Now, the interesting thing is I got a time of 10 o'clock that began. I wish I could tell you why it's 10 o'clock, but apparently this is the official time of the start of the American Civil War. Now, the moon was at 18 degrees of Taurus, exactly where it is on this eclipse. So we get a resonance with the American Civil War at this particular time. Not only that, but on April the 12th, 1861, Neptune was at 29 degrees of Pisces. So we now have a Jupiter resonance to that. And almost as important is the fact that the United States of America's natal Neptune is 22 degrees of Virgo. So already we've got a dance going on with transiting Neptune and the natal position of Neptune. And of course, that was also in play in 1861. And of course, at the time that Abraham Lincoln was elected into office, and basically that is where the whole thing hinged, that was the event. We have a real replay of all of that with Biden, and Biden's midheaven is the USA's Neptune. So this huge kind of Neptune eclipse story is carried on from, well, how many hundreds of years ago? I'm not good at maths. Are we 250 plus years ago? We've got these resonances going on, which is why I said it's going to be very, very interesting to watch the period around the midterm elections for a serious amount of volatility, which may include violence and attacks. We have to wait and see. But let's not forget that when we see these things in astrology and we don't like the look of them, we have to look back in history and see that these difficult times give birth to new times, appropriate times. And we've got Pluto coming into Aquarius next year. We've already had, Saturn is still in Aquarius. We had Jupiter in Aquarius as well. So these are all the heralds of the new age of Aquarius. So things have to change. And there is no way that things change without effort and difficulty and challenge. That's just the nature of life. And I think that's what we're sort of really beginning to see as we come to this important period of time. So let's come back to me again, and let's talk about a few other things that I think are rather important, and again in the nature of this eclipse, which I think might help all of you individually as we approach this time. Simmering situations come to boiling point. Push comes to shove. So there's no reason at all to think that some of these things that have been gathering momentum and they just haven't been able to gel, the timing has been wrong. And I'm talking about our own lives. It takes influences like these, eclipses, oppositions to Uranus, squares to Saturn, squares to Pluto, to change, to move the tectonic plates underpinning situations, to start to get them moving and shifting so that we can move on to new ground. And I really, really want you to embrace that. What I don't want you to do is be fearful about this period coming up. It's part of life, not all of life. And we will be seeing some dramatic developments, but in the fullness of time, all these things will turn out to have been purposeful and useful. So let me get on now with looking at this lunar eclipse sign by sign. So we're going to start off with Scorpio, because for you, it's the sun is in your own sign at the moment. And of course, the moon comes to opposition. So we're looking at first house, seventh house. And if you happen to have Scorpio rising, then you've got the same setup. You've got the sun moving through your first house, and the lunar eclipse will be in the seventh house. So here we are, right slap bang in the area of relationships. And if we think about the solar eclipse that occurred a couple of weeks before, on the 25th of October, that augured some changes coming about in your personal life, with your personal circumstances, Scorpio, and maybe also with ideas and ambitions you have for the future. So we see the inspiration of those things around that time. So what we get when we see the full moon is the impact of other people on your ideas and your moves and your ambitions, because it's very difficult to do something in isolation, isn't it? So the idea that now it's how others feel about the actions you are taking, the things you want to happen. Are they opposing you? Or are they uniting with you? Because let's not forget, that's the principle of a full moon. It's closure and completion. And that means sometimes there is unity, a coming together to move on to the next stage. And sometimes there is polarism or polarity, so that you go spinning off in opposite directions. This is a very, very important time for key relationships in your life. It's make or break. It's go forward or exit. It's the kind of extreme. And I think particularly if your birthday is around that period, then that's going to loom large in your existence at the moment. I think too, we see the effects of other people's actions in your life as well with this full moon. So you may be making all the decisions and feeling all the things you feel. And now someone else comes along and presents you with how they feel and their actions. And it's up to you to respond to that. It's a big turning point, Scorpio. And even if we put it out beyond the area of relationships and we're looking at finance or the kids or your job or whatever it may be, other people will have played a very, very big part in the events that are happening to you around this time. If we come to Taurus, then the full moon, the moon itself is in your sign. And I often say when that happens, you are empowered. This empowers you. It's almost the idea that the heart and the will combine to give you power. That's a very, very good way to look at this lunar eclipse as empowering. If we think about what's been going on before this time, and we take ourselves back to the solar eclipse on the 25th of October, the sun is already moving through the area of relationships. And as we saw in the horoscope, we've got Venus there and Mercury there. So there's a whole trio of planets moving through the seventh house, which means there is already a very big accent on your relationships with other people in general. But of course, when we think about relationships, we think about our most significant relationships, our relationship with a company who we work for, our relationship with our significant other, our spouse, and other relationships which involve our emotions. So when we come to this lunar eclipse, it's almost like saying, make or break time. Are you ready to make a commitment to this company, this person, this situation which involves other people? Or are you saying, I'm out of here? And as I said before, what's important here is the fact that the moon is in your sign, Taurus. It's empowering you. And again, let's go back to that April-May period, and you may be able to trace what's happening right now by going back to April and May, when the other eclipses were in play at that time. Now, if we look at Leo, the sun is moving through your fourth house. So often here we think about beginnings, new beginnings. And the reason we do that is that if we think of our horoscope as a tree, then it's the roots of the tree, which are in the fourth house. It's the roots of life. This is why we find our family there. We find our home, our base in life. And of course, if we think about our childhood, which of course is fourth house as well, how we were brought up and what we were exposed to plays into our adult life, our adult choices, how we go out into the world and make an impact on our world. That's why the fourth and 10th houses are linked, have a lot to do with home life, private life, our career, and our life out there in the world. So these are linked by this lunar eclipse. So first of all, we have a look at the solar eclipse, which occurred there on the 25th of October. So we've got something new, a new chapter opening in regard to family life, your roots, your origins, things to do with where you live, the choices you make, which are going to have a bearing on your future life. Let's put it that way. So that was what has been coming in over these past 2 weeks. And now we've reached our lunar eclipse, our full moon, and we're going to see the full effect of what's a potential and what's real, what you can expect from those openings or ideas you had a couple of weeks ago. Now, sometimes on a full moon, just generally, we get a crisis. Remember, I use those 3 words, crisis, catharsis, and major shifts in situations, allied to the idea of this lunar eclipse. And so it may be that already you've reached the end of the road with a job or with some other situation that has a bearing on your future. Maybe you had no choice in the matter. You didn't want that to happen, but it happened. And of course, there's a lot of things going on at the moment with the economy, which means that people are having to make very difficult decisions about jobs. Employers are making difficult decisions. So a lot of people are no longer looking at a job that's going to last them for years. It may be on its way out, or it may already have abruptly gone. But of course, in the wake of that ending come new beginnings. Even if you can't see them right now, they're going to come out of this, and we have to finish things off, close that chapter in order to embark on a new road. And remember, that promise of a new road was within the solar eclipse on the 25th of October. So if now we look at Aquarius, we see the sun is in the 10th house. So for the past couple of weeks, a little bit longer than that, the sun has been moving through the 10th house of life direction, particularly your career. It's life ambitions. It's the life goals you have. It's the sort of thing in the 10th house. When we think about the 10th house, we think about what do I want to be doing, next year? Where am I going with this situation? What is my ultimate goal with this situation in hand? What is my role in life? Am I a parent? Am I a nurse? These are the different roles we may all have. And so the sun moving over this area over a 4-week period makes it an optimum time to really consider your role in life and where you wanted to go. But of course, throw an eclipse in there and these other aspects to Uranus and Saturn, and you've got things happening to your role in life. So yes, what I've just been talking about, an abrupt end to a job you may have thought you had for years. We're also looking at changes in your job circumstances, which doesn't rule out the idea of some kind of promotion, some kind of move to a whole other stratosphere in terms of what you do in life. All these are possible at this time. But it may also mark a time when you are naturally at the end of your working life. It is retirement time. And for a great many Aquarians, that's what we're seeing. If you're at that particular age or you want to retire early, whatever it may be in your circumstances, this lunar eclipse is all about that. And of course, it can be a good thing. It doesn't have to be a really bad thing. But as always, you've got Saturn in your sign, Aquarius, right now. And we know that the sun and the moon, this lunar eclipse, is squaring Saturn in your sign. And so I think especially if you have a birthday somewhere between about the 6th and 10th of February, then it really is time to make a very, very important long-term decision. And one perhaps that you're going to have to make quite quickly because of the implication of Uranus in this total lunar eclipse. Trust yourself, Aquarius. You make good decisions by and large, and you'll make a good decision here. If we come along to Pisces, we see that the sun at the moment is moving through the 9th house of overseas travel, of things to do with international events, international companies, things to do with your life further down the line. Now, remember, you've just heard me talk to Aquarius about your life goals, what you want to have happen in your life, in your career, and all of that. Now, there's a little bit of a similarity here, but not quite. The 9th house is a bit like your 5 or 10-year diary. You're thinking about, where do I want to be in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time? What do I want the circumstances of my life to look at? What am I aiming towards? What are my yearnings, really? Because all these kind of mutable houses, of which the 9th house is one, is about seeking. You're seeking something in these houses. So you are seeking to find yourself, if you like, and looking at that stretching down the road. That's an important kind of aspect of your life, because we're not just living in the present. We are also looking at the future, because that comes out of our present. So this lunar eclipse for you, Pisces, strong action already on things to do with overseas, the international scene, education, knowledge, experience, journeys and experience. So now we put a lunar eclipse there, and it looks like it's the end of a journey. Now, sometimes an end of a journey is a wonderful thing. When I'm writing my books and I've come to the end of the book, it does feel like the end of a journey. And although there's a sense of gratitude, wow, I made it, I got from the beginning to the end, there's also a sense of sadness because you're not going to have this thing anymore. So you want to think about this lunar eclipse, Pisces, in the sense of the end of a journey, because I think it will help you understand. And of course, it may be that it chimes with real life and you will be completing a journey at this particular point in time. There are legal overtones here, Pisces, and I think if you're already going through a legal procedure, whether it's some sort of documentation that you have to deal with, or it's taxes, or it's something like that, or whether you really are involved in a legal case, this lunar eclipse is going to be a decider. It's going to decide yes or no, where you go from here. It's also a good time to complete a course. So maybe you've been looking at a skill and you've been acquiring all that skill set that you need. This is the end of it. Or you've been on some other kind of learning curve in education and it's now complete. If we look then at the opposite sign with Virgo, well, we've got the sun moving through the third house, and it has been moving through the third house for the last couple of weeks or so. And the attention here is on things to do with the everyday. There are things to do with things that matter to you in an everyday sense. So it is your neighborhood. You see your neighborhood every day. Maybe you don't go out into the neighborhood every day, but you see it from your windows. So it's what's going on in the neighborhood. And it may be that you're active in your neighborhood at this time. So the events that are going on are to do with next door neighbors. They're to do with people across the street. They're to do with organizations and charities and activities that may be going on in your home area. Maybe you've been working or contributing on something that's going to happen, and this full moon eclipse on the 8th of November says all the preparation is done, we're ready to go. On the other hand, it could be that the event itself is done. And when I think of what I was talking about a little minute ago, I was talking about the midterm elections. Well, there's an awful lot of preparatory work in the neighborhood being done on elections and voting. So you can see this quite clearly. All the work is done. And now here it is. We've got the elections going and we get a result. So that might be something, a kind of metaphor for things going on in your life, Virgo. I think we also need to look at travel here, because the moon, of course, will be in the 9th house of long-haul travel. Does it mean that you're tying up arrangements and plans for a big journey? Not necessarily now, but next year, perhaps. And it's a big, complicated procedure, getting all the details of that journey together. Or is it a journey in legal terms? You're embarking on a lawsuit, or you're embarking on something that has legal implications. And so this full moon, this eclipsed full moon on the 8th of November, and around that time, are going to give you some important development linked to that idea of a journey. If we move on now and we look at Gemini, well, for you, the sun has been moving through the 6th house of work and well-being. And I call this the house of systems, because we think about the system of our lives and we think about the pattern of our daily lives. That's a system. We get up in the morning, we have breakfast, we don't have breakfast. Later on, we pick up the kids from school and we start an evening with the kids of homework, or maybe we come to the end of a job, we go out, we have drinks with friends, whatever it is. There's a pattern of your daily life, and we find that in the 6th house. It's a system by which your life runs. But it's also the health system, your system. And that's why we get work, well-being, routines, and all these things attached to the 6th house. So while the sun has been moving through this area, maybe you've been on a bit of a health kick. Maybe you've been trying to get fitter, healthier, stronger. Or maybe you've been working on a condition that you've developed and you're trying to sort it. You're trying to get an answer for it. You're trying to get healed. Well, this lunar eclipse will have something to do with that. We'll give you an answer. It may bring about a sort of crisis in terms of all the things I've mentioned. And sometimes, our days get on top of us, don't they? Our life gets on top of us. We just got too much to do. There's too much of a burden on our system. And it's like this full moon causes that kind of crisis point. Remember, crisis, catharsis, major shifts. But it's after that we are able to reschedule, we're able to look at how to make things better for ourselves after that. It's an important full moon. I think we sometimes think, we talk about the 6th house, the 12th, the 9th, the 3rd. We call them cadent houses. We call them mutable houses. And it's sort of got a sense that, these don't matter very much. No, they're not like the 1st house, the 7th house, the 10th house, and the 4th house, where it all happens. These are all initiating houses. But hello, you can't start if you haven't finished. So the idea of completion, which of course is the fulfillment of the full moon as well, closure and completion, has a lot to do with this sixth house. We come to the opposite sign, Sagittarius. Well, the sun has not yet come into your sign. It won't come into your sign until later in November. So it's doing its 12th house circuit. And the 12th house is a very mysterious place. It's like fog, mist, murk. We can't be sure of anything when we've got planets moving through our 12th house. It's the world of emotions and feelings. It's the unconscious mind. And, sometimes when we're working with an unconscious mind, we were not very good with the conscious world. I had an experience of that recently. I was so involved in what my unconscious mind was informing me that I actually forgot my own telephone number. So it is quite difficult to put the world of consciousness and real life, if you like, together with this powerful transit of the 12th house, where you are so open to the unconscious mind and the kind of more subtle messages coming at you on a day-to-day basis. Now, sometimes when we've got a 12th house transit, the sun is moving through our 12th house, we really do need to shore up our reserves. We need to make sure we're fit and healthy. We're getting enough rest. We're getting enough good dreaming sleep. And because we are focusing on this, it means that when the sun does come into your own house, into your own sign and into the first house, then your batteries are recharged and you are replenished. So when we look at this lunar eclipse, it's going to bring to you, awaken, remember it's conjunct Uranus, what things need to be addressed in your life that have been under the radar. You haven't noticed them, you haven't seen them, whether they are situations in real life that you've missed, or whether there are things to do with your well-being that you've missed. But I can't stress the importance of recognizing the subtleties of life, the subtle signals, whether they're signals coming from your unconscious mind or whether they're subtle signals that other people are sending you. So particularly around this time of the lunar eclipse, and before, if you like, certainly at the start of November, you need to put in a lot more sleep or rest time, because then you'll get the best out of this lunar eclipse in the sense of epiphanies and awakenings. So let's now come to Aries, and we're looking at the sun moving through your 8th house at the moment. So this is all about other people's money. It's all about the intimate layers of relationships. And two things people find very difficult to talk about are money and sex. And that's why they belong in the 8th house. It's Scorpio's house. It's ruled by Pluto. And it's all about what you don't talk about, but what you don't see, what's under the mattress, so to speak. So having the sun move through this area can mean a lot of things really now need to be done in the underground world of sex and money. It means lifting the lid off these two areas of life. And of course, there are great riches here. I often think about Pluto's kingdom, the underworld. There was Tartarus, where all the souls of the dead were crying and screaming out to be helped. And then on the other side, there was this beautiful area in which beautiful things were happening, and everybody there was living happily and calling to the souls in Tartarus, saying, "Come join us. It's lovely over here. The weather's lovely." So often in this 8th house, there are things that we really fear and we don't want to expose ourselves to, which of course are actual enrichment once we do look at them. So maybe since the start of October, you've had a lot of discussions already with banks and lending institutions, your partners, whether they're business partners or whether they're life partners. And so you share your finances. So maybe there's been a lot of work already going on, and hopefully you've been able to discuss it and been able to see what's going on, so that by the time the lunar eclipse comes along on the 8th of November, you can sign a deal and say, it's done and dusted. We got somewhere. We found a solution. Now, if that hasn't happened, there's been no discussion, there's been no exploration of what's going on in this financial world, then my goodness, when that lunar eclipse comes along, it's like that simmering situation, come up to the bubble, and it's much, much more difficult to manage. So if you're listening to me a week or so before that lunar eclipse and you haven't looked into what's going on with your finances, can I suggest it's a good time to do that and to start early discussions with people with whom you have financial relationships. It's also about intimacy, this area. And again, sometimes it is difficult to talk about sex. And sometimes it's difficult to talk about sex with our partners because we don't hurt anyone, or we don't want to, make things worse, or maybe we feel we're not worthy of talking about what pleases us or what doesn't please us. So really and truly, if intimacy is a bit of an issue with you at the moment, Aries, let's get it out there. Let's talk about it. Let's deal with it. So coming to the opposite side, we look at Libra rising, sun in Libra. It means that now the sun is in the next door neighbor sign of Scorpio. It's in the second house. So again, over the past couple of weeks, a little bit longer, maybe you have a lot of financial things going on. Maybe you've been making a lot of money, or maybe you have been intensely working at generating your income or dealing with things that will make you money. Because when we've got transit in the second house, we want to shore up our security and stability. And it's kind of down to us. We don't look at other people providing for us. We think about, how can I provide for myself? So as the sun transits the second house, as the sun transits your next door neighbor sign of Scorpio, then this is time to roll up your sleeves and start working on generating your income and dealing with things that are in your own backyard. So, of course, as the full moon eclipse happens, and that's in the area of other people's money, the financial relationships you have, then this is a moment where you can either do a deal, sign on the dotted line because you've done all the preparatory work with, making moves to increase your income or deal with your income so that you can strike a deal on that full moon or thereabouts. It doesn't have to be on the day, but it's about that time. But so too is the reverse, that maybe you had no idea what was coming out of left field. Suddenly an organization you're working for goes belly up. That means you haven't got a salary anymore. Maybe it means that your mortgage provider or your energy provider, whatever it may be, because this is an institution, has problems and you're in receipt of those problems. So what can you do about it? Well, I'm going to be talking about fate and free will in a minute, but the idea that things happen out of left field on an eclipse of any sort is true. And you can't prepare for what you don't know. But with me here talking to you, what you can do is lift the lid on your finances and have a look at where there are holes, where you're spending too much money, where you could conceivably earn more money. And so this is a time you need to be stacking up your security and stability. And then when the full moon comes up, and we'll have a look and see what it throws up, either in the way of fate or whatever may happen, you've already, done some of the heavy lifting so that you're ready for it. Always remember those three words that I've given you right at the start of this video: crisis, catharsis, and major shifts. These are the types of experience available at this particular point in the year. So our last two signs, Cancer and Capricorn, we have Cancer, the sun is moving through your fifth house, the creative fifth house. This is a happy house by and large. This is where we have the joy of whatever the joy is, the joy of cooking, the joy of sex, the joy of parenting, whatever it may be, the joy of creativity we find in this fifth house. And the sun moving through there means that we can find our creative source, our inner muse, our inner child, all these kind of things, the wellspring of our ability to create in life. And when we're creating, we are enjoying life. We are expressing ourselves, which is why we get love affairs. designated by this fifth house area. We get children, we get pregnancy, childbirth, all of this can be in this fifth house area. So the sun moving through it is making all these things already important, and you may recognize they're happening in your life anyway. Put the lunar eclipse in there, and you get the end of a gestation period in neon lettering. This is the end of a big gestation period. Maybe if you are pregnant right now and you're going to give birth, we can see quite easily why it's the end of a gestation period. But of course, other things are gestating. And if we go back to the solar eclipse in April, we maybe see that was the beginning of this particular gestation period. And certainly if you've got a romance that began in April, May, or a romance that began in August, say, then you are at a critical point with that romance relationship. It's either we're going forward because we're ready to go deeper, we're ready to make a deeper bond with each other, or it's almost like whatever energy was around at the time has fizzled out, and that really is the end of the affair. So this solar eclipse can bring an end to something. But, you know, somehow what I've been saying throughout this video so far, all endings give way to a new beginning. And that is really what you have to think of at this particular point in time. Coming to Capricorn, yes, you've got the sun moving through your 11th house. And this is a very entrepreneurial area. You know, we're on the creative axis. So we're looking at the completion of an entrepreneurial deal, an entrepreneurial project or a team project, or something that you're working with other people. It's more of a collective area. This 11th house is not what you do on your own. It's like the 5th house is very much your own offering. When we get to the 11th house, we're sort of like group offerings. We're like collaborations. You know, other people are part of this particular story. It's also an area where I think we find a lot of fulfillment by sort of going out into the world, into the bigger world than our own small world. So maybe already with the sun moving through the 11th house, you've joined an organization, you've got involved with a charity, you're thinking about how your actions impact other people, other worlds, and so you're already involved in that collaboration. On the other hand, we could be bringing it right much closer to home, and we are looking at projects that you have at work. And so this particular full moon brings an end to that project. And maybe in some cases, if you're working in a collective or a cooperative, then this is the end of that cooperative venture. It is done its time. That's an end to it. And I suppose you can also get the idea that friendships also in this mix, and maybe a friendship is already at it's going through a difficult time, and maybe what happens around this time is that it's really obvious that this is a toxic relationship, or friendship. It's not built to survive, and maybe friendships come to an end as well. But that's a season too, isn't it? And sometimes we do break up with friends. We do break up with organizations and collaborations. And after a little while, we come back to them. It doesn't always mean it's final. It just feels final at the time. So there we go. My work my way through the 12 signs of the zodiac. And it's time really for my conclusion. And I thought about this when I was sort of taking my notes for what I was going to be talking about. And I thought, with an eclipse, which is a very fateful thing, the events that happen at the time of the eclipse make it feel as though fate has stepped in. And what can you do about that? It's a very interesting question, isn't it? I mean, we have free will, and we know that. That's the reason we're here. If we were just hamsters on a treadmill, just going round and round at God's pleasure, so to speak, what's the point? The point is that we have free will, and it's our free will that changes the wheel, if you like. Now, I have a a belief, and I think this goes along with a lot of other spiritual systems, that in between lives, we make a choice about our next life. And we decide, what are the areas we need to work on? What situations do we need to come back to and meet? What do we need to learn? What do we need to atone for? What do we need to fulfill in this life? And these events that come randomly into our lives are those which allow this process to occur. Now, a lot of people don't believe in past lives, don't believe in anything like this. But yet, if we look at the random events that come into our life and we think, where did that come from? Of course, in the wake of that, we make decisions, which is where our free will comes in. But you can backtrack from the moment a fateful event happens, and you can think, oh, if I'd have done this then, this wouldn't have happened now. So one way or another, certainly when we look at fate working in our lives, when we look at eclipses, which indicate fateful developments, we have a part to play in them. Yes, they may seem random, but somehow, somewhere along the line, we made a choice. And certainly in the wake of those events, we make choices. And that's why it's so important to be more aware and to look at situations from a much, much bigger perspective, because then we can make better choices. So I wanted to come back a bit and have a look at this idea of random events impacting our life. And it was something that I've been working on recently. And this is really to do with the death of the Princess of Wales in 1997 in an accident, a really fateful event. There she was, happy in life, just taking a journey home to Dodie's apartment, and bang, that's it. That's the end of the story. But of course, it's more complicated than that. And I like things to be a little bit more complicated than that. You could look at all the random decisions that were made that night before heading out on that journey, because that journey was not planned. At midday on the Saturday, the 30th of August, there were no plans to go to Dodie's apartment in the evening, or none that seemed, to matter at that time. They were going to stay at the Ritz Hotel. So only over dinner or around that time was a decision made to go back to his apartment. Last minute decision, random, they made it together. And also random was the Mercedes that was brought. Henri Paul, not expected to be chauffeuring them. So all these were random things. And at the end of that random set of decisions came a terrible accident. We can go back further than this. Why was Diana in Paris on that night with Dodie in those circumstances? And I would go back to 1994, a little bit before that time, the year before, the Princess of Wales, Diana, had made a decision to retire from public life, which, in my opinion, was the right thing for her to do. She made a decision to step out of the spotlight. That was the right decision because it gave the royal family, if you like, an opportunity really to see if they could survive without Diana. As it was, bereft of a real role in life, direction, the things that really counted to Diana, other than her beautiful children, was the idea that she was of purpose. She had a rich purpose in life for the world, if you like. So she made a decision in the end of September 1994, to return to public life. And I think that was the decision that changed her life. And had she not made that decision, she would not have been in those circumstances on the 30th of August, 1997. Now, I haven't got a long time to discuss all of this. There is much more to this story, and I don't want to get into any conspiracy theories of anything like that. I just want to point out that decisions that we make years later that seem random really had their genesis in that decision that we've made. And I think that's a really important thing to think about in this period of time, in this period of 2022, which is dynamic, it's volatile, it's life-changing, and each of us in our own lives have decisions we make. We're not talking about, shall I have fish for dinner? We're talking about more important decisions than that. And we need to make them with complete awareness. So thank you for watching, and I hope you got a lot out of this video. And as always, please tell your friends, please spread the word of good astrology, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.